Ready?
Yep.
Welcome to today's Policy and Planning Committee meeting of 10th of April 25. Chair, because I have apologies from Councillor Dunn and Councillor Hero, Chair and Vice Chair, and further apologies from Greg Morn. And we've had a resignation from Chris Shenton as a track representative, so that stands as a vacancy position. So by my reckoning, we do have a quorum, but if somebody leaves the room, we will need to adjourn. Would somebody, while I'm on it, like to receive those apologies, please? Councillor Wilson, second. Councillor Charlene, those in favour? To my eye, carried. Thank you very much. I have no public forum. Any conflicts of interests? Oh, thank you very much. Moving to item 5, confirmation of order of business is as on the agenda. Thank you. And confirmation of minutes. I'm looking for alterations, corrections starting on page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Somebody like to so move? Councillor Wilson.
Move, correct.
Councillor Wong seconding. Those in favour? Those against? Carried. Thank you very much. We do have the Chair's report, and you've all seen it. It's on your agendas. Are you happy to take it as tabled?
Your Worship, can we do the follow-up actions?
Okay. Come back to that. Thank you. In terms of follow-up actions, page item number 7. Who's taking us through that?
Look, I'm happy to take that as read. There are 2 actions sitting in there that both have responses on. Mr. Cullis is in the room if you've got any further questions around the Building Act, dangerous and sanitary buildings question.
Any further? Looking for a mover, seconder. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Wong, those in favour? Those against? Carried. Thank you. Chair's report. I think Councillor Hero for a very adequate, great Chair's report. Any questions associated with it? Would you rather that I or somebody else reads it?
Taking it as being received and just acknowledging that she is unwell and I wish her well.
Second to that, Councillor Charlene seconding. But were there any questions associated with it? Hi. Thank you very much. Moving to item number 9, page 22. The Gambling Venues Class 4 Policy and TAB Venues Policy Deliberations Report. Shanna, it's in your... Would you like to speak to it?
Thank you. So I'll just briefly go over this report. So this one's just to bring to you the information so you can deliberate on both the gambling venues and the TAB venue policy. We consulted on these across January through to February, and we received 14 submissions from the public, including 1 late submission, and 5 of the submitters chose to speak at the hearing that we held last month. Just a high-level summary of the submissions that we received. 8 of the submitters supported a sinking lid policy, versus 5 supported a cat-based policy. There weren't as many submitters that commented on whether or not they support relocation or merging, but I know there was a fair split between support and against for those ones. In terms of the TAB venue policy, there was mostly great support, with 7 submitters supporting to retain the policy as it currently was. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions, councillors? No questions. I'll then ask just for a receipt of the report.
Receipt.
Councillor Wilson moving. councillor Charlene, seconding. Those in favour? Aye. Carried. And then it's up to somebody to put the recommendations in terms of recommendation 2. First of all, this one should be straightforward, to receive all the submissions. Moved by councillor Wilson. Councillor Lambert, you wish to speak to it?
Yes, just to say the quality of the submissions we received on this somewhat sensitive subject were really high, and I think those that took the time to submit on the subject, just wanted to make that as a point. But I'm happy to receive all the submissions.
Okay, any further speakers?
No, not really, no.
Put it to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Carried. Thank you. Now we come to the crux of it in terms of the recommendations. There is an or in terms of the Policy Planning Committee recommends to Council the gambling venues Class 4 is adopted as consulted on, with or without amendment, or that the Policy Planning requests to amend the venues Class 4 with the following policy directions: a sinking lid cap, and does or does not have relocation provisions, and does or does not have merging provisions. Do we have a view? Any further direction from staff? Nothing you want to add to it? So Wilson.
Yes, I'm happy to move recommendation 3. That the Policy and Planning Committee recommends to Council that the gaming venues Class 4 policy is adopted as consulted on without amendment.
Looking for a seconder to that. Councillor Wong seconding. Move to you to speak to your motion.
Yes, again, further to the earlier recommendation, it is a sensitive subject, and there has been a huge amount of discussion among many people, particularly relating to the submissions that we received, and it is a difficult one, and it is one that can become very emotive in its thinking. It is a matter that affects all aspects of our community, but it does have to be balanced in our decision-making powers as a council and as councillors. I believe that the policy that has been sent out for consultation is adequate to address the subject matter as best we can as councillors. Therefore, I'm happy to present it as such, speaking for my motion.
Any other speakers? Councillor Warren.
I will support Deputy Mayor Wilson's comments. I'd like to add that in the recent press media, there is a lot of news about the upcoming central government review on other gambling issues. So our one is addressing a local problem, and I think the wider issue to do with more online stuff is being addressed at a wider level. So I'm quite happy with our position where we are now.
Councillor Loudon.
I'd like to speak against the motion. I feel council the second option. I feel as though council has the opportunity and the responsibility to minimise harm in our community. And although I understand arguments on both sides of the presentations that were made, it's the harm issue that, from my perspective, that stands above the rest. So I would prefer a single policy.
Any further speakers? I'll speak in support of the recommendation. I take on board Councillor Loudon's comments about harm. I understand also that there are other gambling options that are less easily controlled. So I'll support the motion. Right to reply.
Thank you, Worship. Just to acknowledge Councillor Loudon's comments with regards to the harm that is not lost on anybody sitting around this table and is not lost on the decision that we face. However, the sinking lid aspect of it, as opposed to a cap, is probably the one key thing that we have to consider. I believe that the sinking lid is detrimental to, can be or could be detrimental to operators as a whole, and those operators do operate in a often an environment that does form part of our community, for right or for wrong, or for good or bad. And I don't think that we should be in the position to be effectively dictating to or determining what the outcomes of their business may or may not be. So that's a sticky point for me. I do endorse a cap because I certainly don't want to see any more. And I think the cap is the best way to go. So just speaking again in favour of the motion.
I now must put it to vote. Those in favour of the motion? The motion is carried. Do you want to vote recorded against?
Yes, please.
Recording councillor Loudon's vote. The contrary. A recommendation for the Policy Planning Committee recommends to council that the TAB venues policy is adopted as consulted on with or without amendment, or that the Policy Planning Committee requests that officers develop a new TAB venue policy that allows standalone TAB venues to establish within the Rangitikei district. Would somebody like to so move?
Move, your worship, everyone seems to be looking at me, but I'll move recommendation 4 again is adopted as consulted on without amendment.
Looking for a second or two there. Councillor Lambert. Wish to speak to it.
I don't think I do, your worship. I think enough's been said in the previous recommendations.
Any other speakers? Put it to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Sorry, that was a half mast. Are you voting against?
Yes.
You want it recorded as such?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Carried. Moving to item 9.2, water-related services bylaw findings and options. Jana, back with you.
Thank you. So this report here is the first part of the process of reviewing a bylaw. This part needed to be completed by the 30th of April, so we've met that deadline, so it's been reviewed on time. So the purpose of this water-related services bylaw is just to regulate all water-related services in our district. So that includes water supply, wastewater, stormwater, including the private drain network, as well as trade waste. So what I'm seeking from you today is that you're satisfied that the current bylaw has been reviewed and what the next steps you want to take are. So whether you want to retain the current bylaw, amend the current bylaw, or revoke it.
Thank you. Would somebody first of all like to move the report be received? Councillor Wong moving, Councillor Sharlin seconding. Those in favour? Those against? Carried. Thank you. A question from me. Do staff find gaps within the policy as it currently stands?
And so you'll see the attachment to the report. We've gone through the bylaw clause by clause, which identifies areas that we think could be improved on.
Any further questions? So this would, because of the way that our policies work, you would then need to draft up those and consult on those as drafted, correct?
Yes. To be fair, any action that you take today, whether it's go ahead with the new one, amend it or revoke it, would all require consultation.
In which case, does somebody want to move? Councillor Wilson, thank you for that. Yes. New help.
Again, what's of interest in this one, this was reviewed in 2020, is that correct? Yes. And if I recall correctly, there was a significant amount of work done on this policy at that time, particularly in areas around the private drain network and that type of thing. And I recall a great deal of reports and discussions coming on to that. My first take on this document when I was reviewing it through was it still remains fit for purpose. However, hearing what your worship has just said, you've indicated that there might be some areas that you feel would need to be tightened up on or improved. What does the consultation on that look like, if I can ask?
So it's set out in the Local Government Act, would have to follow the special consultation process set out there. So that would involve, we would have to, if you're looking at amending the policy, we would have to put a draft together and write a statement of proposal explaining what changes we're seeking to make.
Okay. Let's come back to that one. Sorry.
While you're doing that, I'm prepared to second, so your motion is live.
Yeah. Sorry, Your Worship, I just seem to have lost some pages here.
Any questions from other councillors?
Clarifying the recommendation.
Page 41 of it.
Yeah, the paragraph 2, that the current bylaw could be improved in line with the findings of the report, and the current bylaw does not give rise to any implications and was not inconsistent with the Bill of Rights Act. No, that's recommendation 2.
I think the telling one is that it's still the right process to do this by way of bylaw.
Yes.
So I'll speak in favour of your motion, having spoken to it. Any other speakers? No? You wish to have right or reply?
No, it's been clarified.
I'll put it to the vote. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Thank you. To my mind, that means that we have no option in terms of recommendation 3, that we go for the first option. I'll so move that the policy planning direct officers to make the amendments, etc., and to draft the bylaw as such. Looking for a seconder to that. Thank you, Councillor Lambert. And speaking to that, by saying passing recommendation 2 to say there are gaps in it, we have no alternative. We've said that the bylaw is the right process. We've just got to address it. Any other speakers? Vote those in favour. Those against. Carried. Thank you very much. Moving to item 10, the reports for information. And who's taking us through that?
Jenna will take you through the next item, 10.1.
Thank you. Page 56, councillors, please. Yes.
Yes. So this just provides an update on our policy and bylaw work program. You'll be aware of where the current gambling policies are. Also, just to note that we did bring the draft dangerous and affected and sanitary building policy to this committee. We are now currently consulting on that in line with the annual plan, and then further consideration will be done by the entire council alongside the annual plan. We've just talked about the water related services bylaw. So the only other one on there was just a reminder that the Mokai Bridge bungee jumping bylaw is automatically revoked on the 30th of April. So we will, after that, take down any references to that from our website, etc. Happy to take any questions.
Just a question from me. In terms of the Mokai Gravity bylaw, once the bylaw is removed, is there any requirement to remove material associated with the bylaw? So and the reason I wondered about this is because, for instance, I look at the analogy to Ruapehu and alpine lifts. as dock concessions and so on, that they were saying if this wasn't going to continue, then there'd be the need to remove material from the mountain. Is there any?
It's probably one we would have to come back to you on, given the bylaw was permitting an operator to operate on that site.
Yeah, the only thing I could think of is I'm assuming none of it was ours, so if there is anything left there that was related to the bungee jumping, it's not our asset. The only other thing I would think of is if it's attached to any bridge or if it's in any way affecting the use of that bridge from our perspective.
The answer to that is yes.
Then that's something for Arno's team to
Um,
consider.
that is attached to our structures. And well, certainly one of the activities there.
We'll note it as an action.
Thank you, councillor Loudon.
Page 59, I think it is. Disposal of surplus land and buildings. It's got a high priority, but it's a policy in 2015. Review to begin when staff available. Can you just enlighten me on that policy, because we are potentially going to be heading into that space as a council.
Someone else might want to jump in, but what I would say is that there is a desire to review the policy. It's just the key staff that would be involved in that currently have a lot of other competing priorities.
I've just asked the priority ranking is something that you as council staff have gone through in terms of your assessment around need rather than just timing.
Sorry, what was? Yeah,
No,
no, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
an officer assessment of priority
Yeah.
based on statutory considerations and then also the feedback that we get from councillors as well.
Thank you, councillor Wong.
Just one question, going back to the Gravity Canyon bylaw change. Have the other stakeholders in that been notified that this has been in process? Or had any correspondence with the companies that used to operate it? Or?
No, so potentially I can comment. So there are no operators operating from that site. They haven't been operating for quite a number of years.
I understood that the business was for sale and there was still an entity as such attached to it, but I'm not aware of the current situation.
Yeah, they haven't operated for quite some time. One of it even had expressed interest in it, and I'm not sure if the sale did proceed or not. But certainly recertification of the structures associated with their operation would have had to happen anyway. So they legally couldn't operate without going through that process. The other one I wondered about was drones, and it refers to drones in our parks, but we have a number of flying regulations in terms of association with Ohakea. Do we need to, are they part and parcel of the drones bylaw, and do we need to link two matters together?
I would say that we reviewed actually created the drones policy last year, and through that process, we were talking to representatives from Ohakea.
Okay, so it's covered. Councillor Loudon.
Oh, just through you, Chair, just what Katrina said, that depends on councillors' interest in a bylaw, in a policy. I'd like to sort of record that I would like to see that the disposal of surplus land and buildings reviewed, because we do have potentially sales coming in front of us. It's one of three high priorities, and two of those have been dealt with. It hasn't been reviewed since 2015, so I would urge staff to put more to that policy.
So I wonder if I can just take an action on this to see what the workload of the person who would have to do this is and let you know. You can just send an email around saying whether it's viable or not.
I thought we'd actually covered this reasonably recently in terms of the sale of surplus properties.
It's quite a while.
Not by way of the bylaw, but in terms of priorities and
I think you're right, but I think it was put as high, but it's still dependent on the availability of staff to do the review.
okay.
So we'll come back to you with some.
Are you happy, councillor, that just comes to us as an action to look at?
Thank you.
Would somebody like to receive the report? Councillor Sharlin moving, Councillor Wilson seconding. Councillor Sharlin, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you.
Put it to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving to the strategy and development review update, 10.2.
I won't say much other than to say the report briefly covers some of the, I guess, more notable updates that we needed to make in the way of the waste minimisation management plan, economic wellbeing strategy, annual plan, and proposed plan change 3, with the register attached. If you have any questions about anything in the report or the register attached, please just happy to field them.
A question from me. We're facing considerable change from government at the moment, including the RMA at the top of that list. How much impact does all of the governmental change have around this in terms of government policy statements, etc.?
So significant, substantial. I guess if we're focusing on the RMA reform, I would say I'm pushing ahead, although we'll take your direction on plan change 3, because I think we can get that hopefully sufficiently through the process before the RM reform comes into place and we start needing to redirect resource into addressing that. In terms of implications for the other stuff, if you had any that you wanted to highlight, happy to provide further advice. Text.
Any other questions?
No.
Because the way that I see this, I think you're absolutely right, that we have a window of opportunity to move forward with this now that will be challenging later.
So I would say, just in terms of an update for proposed plan change 3, if I may.
Yeah.
We've done significant amount of work in the technical assessment space, and I'm just reviewing the reports as they flow in, and we'll come back to you ideally in May for a workshop. We've started landowner consultation and we've started consultation with Mana Whenua. And if we can hopefully get to a point where we're in a position to notify this kind of mid to kind of third quarter of this year, then we should be in a position to be able to progress it in advance of the RM reform, obviously subject to submissions and level of interest as well through the process.
I'm happy to move a reception of that. I'm looking for a second or two. Seconding. Any further questions from councillors?
One for me, if I may, through you, Chair. When you look at the amount of work, and that's just sitting on this in some of these plans, and there's a lot of work. And you look at the dates of them, some of them are historic in their nature. Has anybody gone through and said, looked at any of these plans and gone, actually, they don't really, well, they're either irrelevant or they're no longer not required or anything like that? It's a broad thing, but there's a lot of them on there.
I mean, I would say I'm happy to take direction if there's any that you think should be removed.
Well, I don't, you know, at this meeting, I don't want to be calling out various different plans, but I look at some and I go, you know, it's a lot of nice words, but what is it? And why are we doing it? Why do we have it? And what purpose does it serve? But that creates a lot of work for somebody to try and answer that question. But I just wonder if some of these plans that are sitting here are in fact.
I'll have an attempt
Relevant.
to answer and then Katrina can chime in or Carol. What I would say is, and it was my first time actually going through that list of strategies and plans, is in terms of how I'm focusing my effort and my team's effort and what we're focusing on doing for councils, we base it on priority. So anything that's, I guess, low priority won't be looked at by us, and that's why some of them are, I guess, more historic in nature. But what I would say is that in general, if it exists for a reason. And if we needed to review it, then we'd bump it up the priority list. But if it's serving the purpose it needs to serve, then it just sits there until it needs review.
That's fine, thank you.
There's a whole lot of statutory requirements to have them as well.
Well, most of them, yes.
By far the majority of them are in that space.
Oh, Your Worship, there's a hell of a lot that says non-statutory as well.
Yeah.
But I understand the need for them, but it's just, have we looked at the
Effectively,
wider there?
with some of them like town centre plans, they've been developed and they sit there until changes required. Councillor Louder.
I just, the heritage strategy, review unable to be commenced due to internal resourcing, like I fully accept that. But, we do have some heritage, possibly of some heritage advice coming to Martin through Heritage New Zealand and other consultants. Are we able to sort of gather some of the resources that get developed around those initiatives that may start to form a strategy?
So what I would say is certainly we can collect that information and hold it. Part of probably my reasoning when I saw that on the list is that I wasn't keen to explore at this point a review of that strategy was because the government signalled quite a change in the heritage space, including their blueprint for reform for RMA is talking about removing our ability to use the district plan as the mechanism for protecting heritage. So we're waiting to see effectively what that looks like in the future as well. And that would have an impact on our heritage strategy and how we would go about, I guess, supporting and protecting heritage going forward.
So unless councils are wanting to direct staff now to a further body of work, all we're doing here is receiving. So on that basis, I'll say exactly that, in moving it, we're receiving it. Any further speakers?
No.
Or the vote, those in favour, those against, carried. Thank you very much. Welcome to the game, Jared. Thank you. You're here for 10.3, the economic update.
Your Worship. Yes, I'll go through sort of some of the key highlights of the report, sort of line by line, or not line by line, but sort of subject by subject.
What I might do is just receive it, and then if there are questions, and we'll run through section by section. Somebody like to move receipt? Thank you, Councillor Lambert. Moving, Councillor Wong, secondly, those in favour. Those against, carried. Thank you. Floor is yours.
So we've shared the December quarterly update link through there. Some highlights around the performance of our district, really outperforming the wider region and the country, primarily driven by the fact that we have a strong amount of our GDP coming from the primary sector, and the primary sector showing some real gains over that December quarter. A couple of real sort of call outs there just to be watchful of is around consumer spending. Consumer spending is back, and the tourism spending expenditure is back as well. The tourism aspect, I think we're taking a bit of a double hit there, where 90% of our tourism comes from domestic tourism. So a challenging New Zealand economy is having a bigger impact on that sector than potentially some of our other sectors. Yesterday, the Reserve Bank obviously met, announced their latest review, which was a 0.25% drop, kind of within forecast. I think the big message that they've sent out is that it's an unusual time to understand and predict what's going to happen. And they've really followed their previous messaging was that further reductions were sort of to be coming. The interesting anomaly is that they've made that announcement, yet inflation data isn't due until next week. So when they get that inflation data, will kind of change what their forecast might look like.
Just from me, with regard to this report was written prior to the tariff trade war, and this is written from a national perspective, whereas we are a regional agricultural economy. And our principal exports in terms of beef, for example, are to the United States. And so we are yet to see the impact of the tariff at 10% in terms of that sector. So conceivably, we could be impacted fairly heavily regarding this. Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, just further following on from that, you're right, but there still seems to be a lot of positivity long term. In my years of farming, I've never seen optimism stretch so far out despite all this. And that lag in computer spending, a lot of rural support businesses have noticed their business hasn't quite ticked up as fast as farmers. There's a bit of a lag there. So I'm assuming hopefully it's the same thing with the consumer spending. It's just a bit of a lag. Everyone's making sure things aren't too good to be true before they get the card out.
Yeah, just to comment on that, the consumer confidence hasn't rebounded in the same way that some of these rate reductions have hit. There is a lag, but indications are that they're getting better. But indications and confidence really comes off the back of actually feeling it. Yeah. So in regards to the tariffs, the message that we've been receiving from economists are that it will hit the regions harder than the provincial regions. We know 30% comes from the primary sector. 25% of that is red meat, sheep and beef. So there will be an impact. But we do need to wait and see what other markets are available. And that's been the message, is that it's very hard to predict where this goes. So
I absolutely accept that. Councillor Loudon.
Chair, just for clarification, the figures used go to end of December for that quarter,
yes, that is correct.
and we've had another quarter.
Yes.
Are there any information that's coming out of the woodwork for that quarter?
Not as yet. The data we receive is usually 6 weeks after the end of that quarter. Based on my sort of calculations, we're a couple of weeks away from receiving that.
If Councillor Lambert is quite right, if you look at the ag brief forecasts, the schedule continues to rise.
Process.
Yeah. Our earliest indication. Moving on to.
So just there, a little bit of a highlight about Business Rangitikei. They've had their AGM, which was from their words, been extremely successful in growing their committee. And the Business After Fives continue to be well supported. There have been multiple events already held in 25, with another one scheduled for next week as well. Just a little bit of a brief there around the economic strategy. We had at the last committee meeting indicated that we would have a draft ready to go by this meeting. I guess a bit of a message there that unfortunately we just haven't been able to achieve that, and that's really a combination of the changing world we're in and staff capacity. But we have got to a stage where we're getting pretty close, and we have shared the strategy on a page, which really just indicates the direction that the strategy is starting to head into. And we hope to have a draft that is ready for further communication in June at the June committee meeting.
Thank you.
That's the next one.
Mayor's Task Force for Jobs. Just want to kind of highlight that program is continuing to perform very, very well in our district. And I guess the change between the last meeting and this meeting is the additional fund, or the initiative fund for F25, where we've had the opportunity to apply for additional money to place young people in employment with either directly at council or a business or an organisation that has some form of procurement through council. And we were successful in those, applying for 4 placements, which was a conversation with the contractor around what do we think is likely to be successful. You don't want to be applying for money and then giving it back in these instances. So we've kind of worked on a figure that we thought was fair and achievable.
But the definition is reasonably loose. They don't have to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Councillors, we're still going through negotiations with regard to MSD in terms of the contracts going forward. That looks still online. Councillor.
5.4 and 5.5, those council or council linked employment, does that mean that council is employing these 4 people? And has that had an impact upon council's costs?
No, so it's not a case of council employing these people. It might be that they're placed with a business and that business has a contract with council or a relationship with council. That is the sort of definition that Mary Andy was referring to. So if an employment opportunity presented itself, we would engage with MES Task Force for Jobs like we normally would.
Yep.
And we would follow our usual recruitment process. We don't use this as a way to incentivise council to take on these people. We've still got to go through a fair recruitment process like we normally would.
Thank you.
Moving on to the streetscape design. So we've gone through the stakeholder sessions and engagement. The next phase is for that streetscape plan to be drafted, which is currently happening. We expect to have a document in the next, I'll say the next couple of weeks, just recognising that there is Easter and Anzac Day this month as well. So it's getting quite tight in there. But as soon as we have that, that will be shared, Councillor.
Yeah, and just absolutely bear in mind that's part of the capital review program. Carry on.
Number 7, so town centre better off funding. So just a little bit around Bulls. The first map is printed and ready to be put up and will be put up very shortly. There is a mural that's been completed in town, which looks fantastic. So if you get the opportunity when you're going through Bulls, I'd encourage you to stop and have a look at that in the main street there. Rubbish bins are almost completed. And the initiative around stenciling is happening during the school holidays with students participating in that work. With regards to Tai Happy, the map draft is underway and will be shared with all the various working groups. The picnic area and shelter that's going into the throwing lane, that work is pretty well advanced now with the design being completed, and that's going to be bringing in some students to help build that. So a really nice way to engage the local carpentry students up there to achieve some credits as well. So really neat to see that work coming through. That's me. Are there any questions?
Just to comment quickly about that mural, it is amazing. Really good, and it just fits in so well. And I took a picture of it the other day with the sun going down, so it was half in the sun and half out. It was incredible to look at. Yeah, it's really good. Really good.
Your big painting.
He did all spray cans.
Yeah, but your photo, those. You've got that legally.
Thank you. I'll put it to the vote. We had put it to the vote to receive it. It's carried. 10.4. The important stuff. The regulatory update.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I just can ask if the report be received as read. And just to perhaps go through some of the points, there's been some updates when the report was written.
Yes, we can receive it as it's currently standing, and then you're wishing to speak to it or
To
comment
speak
to
to
it.
it, yes.
Look, I'll move to receive it as received. Looking for a seconder to that. Councillor Wilson seconding. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you. Please take us through your thinking.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just in relation to determinations, the report reads that at the last 2.7, no case officer had been assigned. True to form, as soon as the report's written, then they will assign one. So we now at least have had a case officer assigned to look at the determination. The second part there that I would just like to perhaps talk a little bit more about, and I think, Your Worship, you mentioned this one previously, where there was the decision on the right-angled so-called immovable structures or tiny homes. So this determination makes it quite clear that those are buildings and not vehicles. But true to form, at the same time, we've just had the recent update and nod from central government that granny flats of 70 metres is coming our way in 2026. So although this determination is quite clear that they're not vehicles, that they will be buildings, if they're under 70 square, you must probably still have to accept right-angled buildings that are attached to each other. So it's a bit of a give and take. There's, if you look at the data, there is about 500 of these all around the country at the moment that may not be compliant currently. Don't know if there's a question.
Yeah, this is not so much a question, but this is really informing the impact of this on councils. So effectively, you have houses being placed on properties that are effective houses. They're transported as houses. They're having axles and wheels placed under them as a token gesture. And the upshot of that is they can get away with paying no rates. And I have a degree of difficulty for that, not only for our district, but also as a country. Some of these tiny homes are very, very substantial. But I understand also, and that's why I've deliberately for some time sat in on some of the tiny home discussions online with the tiny home associations, etc., so that I could at least understand this sort of stuff. And I thought there was a requirement, even though they're placed on property, that they have a requirement to notify us that that has happened. Is that your understanding?
No, Your Worship. There's no requirement for them to inform us at this stage. From what we've seen at a very high level, there will be a future requirement that if the granny flats pass into legislation, that there's two aspects that they need to notify us. One, when they start building, and the second one when they've completed. But further than that, no onus upon them if they are taking any Schedule 1 exemption work to notify council at all.
Perhaps you might wish to brief council on the difference between the granny flat legislation and tiny homes. They're slightly different animals and so.
Yes. It all just depends on whether it's self-contained or not. Your Worship is basically one of the challenges that you deal with. So at the moment in legislation, you can build a sleep out, for a better word, as long as it doesn't contain any of those other facilities as in portable water or a kitchen or sanitary fixtures. It has to be associated with a dwelling, so that that person can then make use of the facilities in the house, and that up to 30 square meters is exempt for sleep outs. Tiny homes, what service providers have been doing is just as in this determination, is they've been building what they call or perceive vehicles. And some of those trailers are registered and warranted, but whether they can be moved on the road because they are actually loaded on another vehicle that then goes and drops them on the site, although they perceivably registered as a vehicle, but there's no ways that you can actually put that vehicle on the road, some of them. And it's part of that that people are looking at providing a service, filling that gap, but not within the legislative requirements, or using the unclear bits to try and get around what is actually meant in legislation. That makes sense.
Yeah. The upshot of this is you can have a tiny home that is worth several $100,000. That is effectively a house.
Correct.
That is not rated.
And basically just standing perhaps on some base that's got wheels on it, rather than a foundation or piles.
And the requirement to notify Horizons in terms of waste.
That doesn't change, your worship. So any connection to services and things like that has still got to follow the correct process, whether they do or not. And then if we're particularly talking about rural areas, Horizons is particularly interested in any wastewater systems contained within 5,000 square meters, to see whether that is sustainable. If it's a larger property, most probably not an issue, but it's the smaller properties up to 5,000 square meters.
Do we have any idea of the number of these homes that we have in our district?
Not a definite figure. We're aware of some, but there's always the possibility that we haven't come across all of them. The district's quite large. We do have some areas that our officers only go there because they perhaps looking at something different and then come across it. And some of those farms are, or the rural sectors, to that extent that, unless you're specifically going to that property or next to that property, you most probably won't see it for quite a while.
Thank you. Further questions of the report?
Sorry, Your Worship.
Johan had a couple more things.
Sorry, Johan.
If I can just continue to item 3. So there, I just wanted to perhaps highlight to the committee as well that nationally across the country, there's still a decline in building consents, and I've given you a bit of figures there. However, it seems like in our own district, it's good to see that our figures are slowly rising again, and that's continuing. And we have picked up even a bit of a bigger jump from last year to this year, albeit that we again in that phase of people perhaps prepping for winter, so replacing the old fireplaces. We are getting quite a few of that, but even taking that into consideration, we are quite ahead of where we were last year this time as well. And then I don't know if there's any questions around that before I move on to the next item. I just want to.
Good to see it's heading in the right direction.
Yes. Which is sort of, for a better word, bucking the trend, what's happening nationally. And then just lastly, just a quick update around our 2-yearly audit with Irons. And from the report, I can also just update that at the time of writing the report, action plan hadn't been accepted as yet. It is now been accepted, and we've already started to present evidence on the general non-compliances to get those squared away and cleared. So happy to take any other questions.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, if I may, and thank you for mentioning, well, first of all, thank you for sharing the entire report. I found that very, very useful. Clearly that the Irons report is in some detail. And I note here that it's perhaps been a little bit more of a rigorous report than you've had in the past. Is that what I'm indicating in item 3.7?
It's going into more detail each time we have a re-audit, definitely. So it's getting much more focused on the finer detail of how we run a BCA. Yes.
And that's good. And I'd have been disappointed if there had been an external audit looking at us and they hadn't come up with any recommendations. That would have made me somewhat worried that they hadn't come up, because an external audit would always have recommendations. But can you tell me a little bit more detail about what is your plan to address some of the non-compliances? You said you've got a plan. Who's that been addressed to? Has that gone straight to the auditors, or is that something that's running through the chief executive and your team as to what that overall plan for your non-compliances?
Yes, so the chief executive is informed of our process, but it's through the BCA team. Some of the corrective actions are technical, so it's getting the technical experts to look at it, to refine it, to make sure that we are meeting that required regulation. And that's the process that we basically use. So the Irons team also is twofold: the main auditor, but there's a technical person that sits with the auditor, looking at the technical aspects of how we perform certain functions.
Further, if I may, at what stage would we, as a governance team, expect to see an update on some of the outcomes of what it is that you're looking to put in place? Where would we see that, or would we expect to see that?
Yes, certainly through you, Your Worship. So what will happen when this whole process is finalised, but in the interim, if it is something that the committee is interested in, we have to submit that action plan to Irons, and they will then comment and accept it. And so that forms part of the report that I've already provided to the committee in those spaces allocated for the action report. So when everything is finalised and all the non-compliances is signed off, it will show you exactly what has been submitted and accepted to clear that specific concern.
Certainly, as an action, I think that's something that I would like to see come back to either this committee or to Essex or to full council, just an update on where this is. It's a very, very important part of council business. It has a lot of eyes looking at it, so I'd like to see this come back and just make sure it's been actioned.
This is an action. For me, the one telling thing in it for me was a fundamental change, and that was around the actions required for something being non-compliant. And in the past, I'd always been told that the regulatory team don't have a responsibility to say effectively why it is not compliant and what options you would have to make it compliant. Whereas reading that report seems to indicate that it's a core responsibility within the department. So that, if I understood it correctly, that's quite a change in position as well. Any comments around that?
I'm not sure I understand you correctly, Your Worship, but definitely in terms of making sure that we address anything that has been raised, whether it be a general non-compliance. And in our report, we don't have any serious non-compliances, which would basically indicate that you've got a serious gap within your BCA, and that might affect your timeframes of being re-audited. But definitely in terms of any non-compliance, it needs to be actioned and addressed in the appropriate manner. And it can't be cleared until we have satisfied the accreditation body, which is IONS.
I'll come back to that. Councillor Loudon.
Thank you, Johan. For my sins, I read the IONS report, and I feel sorry if we're having to go through an audit like that. But there's a couple of times was mentioned in the report where your team had made a statement, but the IONS report was, I think, suggesting that there needs to be more communication, like, for example, 7.2 in their report. It identified a situation where I think your team needs to work with people rather than just saying these are the rules. I think there needs to be some more communication, and that's what the report says a couple of times, that you need to actually, well, they would like you to work with non-compliance as to how can we fix this together and what do you need to do. That's what came through a couple of these things for me.
Look, I think there's an action to bring this back, and I think we look at it with respect to that. Yeah. Would you be happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything further, councillors?
No.
Thank you very much. Thank you. 10.5, the wind farm update, and there was a presumably a typo page, I think 83. Councillor Duncan referred to a distance, road distance. I think I'll go to the message I received online. Page 82, sorry. The wind farm is not 123 kilometres north of Taihape, explanation mark, if quite correct. So I presume that's just a typo. But on the following direction. Who's going to take us through this?
I will, Your Worship.
Thank you.
So yeah, I accept that that's most probably a typo and should be 23 kilometres rather than 123.
That would be my guess.
Yes. And it's then also a typo in 2.2. So I'll take that as an action point and just check on the accuracy of that as well. Basically, the report, Your Worship, is just to highlight the new fast tracking system. I don't think it's anything new. It was, for a better word, had a bit of a pre-run in the COVID phase where where it was sort of introduced and then placed in legislation as a way forward to give priority to some of the strategic consents that is on the table. This being one of those, and it is more or less based on the same one that we had in the past. And again, a shared area of Ruapea and ourselves with, I think it was Mediterranean. Meridian, sorry, back in the 2000s. And their consent is lapsed, but this one is of a slightly larger scale, more turbines and quite significantly larger than some of the other turbines. And my understanding will be that these might be the largest if they do materialize in New Zealand. So again, it's quite interesting that if we look at the detail attached, it hasn't been finalized because they've got all sorts of logistical problems trying to get those massive turbines and the bodies through our narrow roads. So depending on how they can get those to the site will most probably depend on the end result and their but it's quite happy if there's any other questions that or clarification, I'll try and answer. We do have two other planners in the room as well that we might be able to rely on as well in absence of Joe's.
Question, maybe I'd direct it this way. To contain, even though the fast track is all required to engage with a number of different groups.
Correct, George.
So do those have those groups included, for example, the school?
So what I would say is I can't answer that specifically. My understanding of the fast track process though, I would think it would be unlikely. So there's a really restrictive list of criteria of who they would engage with or invite to engage with into the process. So obviously iwi is on the list.
Yeah.
Ourselves as the territorial authority, because it's within our jurisdiction. Although we won't be actually consenting it, they will come to us for, they call it comment rather than submissions. And then there's a list of like other criteria you need to meet for them to invite you into the process.
So the school and dock are the closely affected neighbours,
Okay, well then if they're a neighbour, then yes.
and they didn't engage when it was Central Wind Farm.
So if it's a neighbour and there's effects on them, then in theory they should be invited into the process, but I can't confirm whether they will be.
Bishop, if I just may, the company has had several community meetings as well where they've invited everybody along to come along. Definitely engagement with iwi, definitely engagement with the military, which is also a neighbour in Wairua, but in terms of individual schools, and I'm uncertain about, but we do know that they've had quite a few public meetings where the interest has been quite considerable, and even to the extent that some of the public meetings were actually dominated by contractors saying, well, we're available for work if this should materialise.
Yeah. Okay. Any further questions, Councillor Lambert?
I just wonder, you probably can't, the access road, when it's built, will that be a public road or a private, do you know? Because with I'm just thinking from a tourism point of view, having the largest windmills in New Zealand could be attractive little, but I see you've got to go through Defence Force land and what have you, so it could be a tad.
My understanding it's private land, so it won't be
Public road.
public road. But it's something that we can perhaps just.
Well, yes.
Yeah, access is,
Military land
There's
challenging.
literally Defence Force land for most of it, and through Motokawa, through the rest of it. Councillor.
I did ask that question, one of the information.
Yeah.
And you did right, it's not going to be open to the public.
No, not even at your own risk.
Certainly, yeah.
Were you wanting to climb one of the turbines?
Well,
You go first and see if you get
Any further questions? No, thank you very much. Council staff, I believe that takes us through to the end of meeting.
Yeah, you just need to receive that report.
We could do that too. I'll also move receipt. Councillor Wilson is kindly seconding that. Those in favour? Those against? Carried. Meeting closed at 2:10. Thank you, linesman. Thank you, all boys.